with that, friends, we welcome you back into OGP Thursday edition. We established, as I'm Adam Armreck, your host here, covering the Nets for the Locked On Nets podcast, if you're into that sort of thing, joined by the generational ticket holder, healthy, wealthy, and wise Andy Makowitz. How are you, sir? Before I finish my thought.
You know, Adam, I'm doing okay. I'm a little tired. This week has caught up to me. Anytime you're at the stadium late on a Sunday afternoon, you know, Monday just comes around and then the beginning of the week seems to drag on. But alas, at least we have a short week this week, in my mind, considering, you know, the Giants play on Thursday night.
Well, that was like so in the old best laid plans category, we recently were laying out our general schedule for the season, when you can find which content, the podcast and YouTube and all that good stuff. And then, of course, the Giants start with week 2, Thursday Night Football. And you go, oh, wait, no. So now that's not going to work. If people come in for a preview on a Friday, they're not going to get any information from us. So, we switched it up a little bit here this week. Obviously, if you're following on YouTube, I did a little bit of snap count coverage from last week. We may touch on a little bit here today. We're also going to start doing some of the injury coverage and quotes from the players and from the coaches, etc. You can find that kind of stuff exclusively over on YouTube. So the podcast, 2 episodes a week, will be really honed in on recapping what we saw from the week prior and then looking ahead to the next matchup, which is, of course, the first divisional game here with the Washington football team. Before we started, Giants, if they were to lose, would be 5 straight years, 0-2. Gotta love that action. And then I believe you said 10 straight years losing the opening game of the season, correct? We've already done that.
No, Adam, no. It's 10 out of 11.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, give him a little bit of credit. I believe it was, you know, Adam. You know, there's a lot of good stats flying around on Twitter. You know, the other one is. Since the end of 2016, there's only one team in the league that hasn't had a winning record at some point from 2017 to 2021, and that would be our New York Football Giants. So we're the only team in the league that has not had a winning record in the last 4 years at any moment during any season.
I don't know. And listen, this is me personally. I don't know how important wins and losses are in sports, to be honest with you. If we're spitballing here, I don't know what the metric is. There's a lot of things that go into who's the best team and did a championship happen. Who even knows if those things are real based on how the Giants have performed recently?
Well, Adam, it sounds like you and Herm Edwards would not get along. That's what I'm getting for this, because you're like, how important are wins and losses, and obviously
almost exclusively for Herm
here.
Yeah,
exactly.
Almost exclusively Herm only wants to know what wins and losses. So we come into this matchup, as we said, Thursday Night Football. You gotta like that. Giants v. Washington. That's what we're here to do. And of course, just to give you that little heads up on the line, which has been moving, it's going to be +3 for the Giants now on the road, over under at 40.5. That line moved from Giants were getting 3.5 at one point here. It could move even a little bit more before we get to the game tomorrow night. And then the 40.5 started, I think, at 39.5, and has moved up a little bit. The one thing I just want to cover this real quick, because I said we're going to do some of this other stuff over on YouTube, but on the short week, we won't have a chance to. One of the things when we talk about, you know, this team, where it's been and the general perception of them, the ramifications of losing week 1, how much stock do you put in it? Do we automatically cast Jason Garrett off onto, you know, Skull Island? Like, what do we need to do here? The post-game commentary, I will say, when you're in a place that Joe Judge, when they say, man, that fumble, I think it was Jordan Renan asked the question, like, that fumble by Daniel Jones in that spot, it's pretty bad, right? Quarterback needs to do better, is essentially what he asked him. When Joe Judge responds with, yeah, we all got to do better, you know, all phases of the game, it's a team getting better, we're going to look at the tape, we're going to, you know, try to improve, get a win, we all know we need to do it, whatever, all that kind of jargon. That's probably, as you heard when he was first hired, right? Is the coach speak good enough? Do we want to really lean into this with Joe Judge? It's all great until you... Like, it's all right just to be like, yeah, man, you can't do that in the big spot there, right? Like, do you feel like, is it almost more concerning that Joe Judge wouldn't just say, hey, yeah, DJ can't do that there, as opposed to overprotecting him, leading you to maybe think they're concerned about the toughness and mental, you know, ability of Daniel Jones to take some of the heat after things like that?
Adam, I think it points to another head coach in the league, and that would be the Tennessee Titans coach, Mike Vrabel, who was at his press conference and they asked him about his newly required, soon to be Hall of Fame wide receiver in Julio Jones, and said, he struck a player in the helmet, cost the team 15 yards when you were driving. What do you think about that at a critical moment? And he cursed and screamed, and he said that he would never have that. It was a terrible mistake. He should never do that, and he knows better. And now the media is coming out and saying, like, is there a rift between Julio Jones and Mike Vrabel? He hasn't built up enough equity because he hasn't been around Mike Vrabel, even though he's caught thousands of footballs in his career and will go down as a Hall of Famer. Look, I think it's one thing to come from the Bill Belichick school where it's like, listen, in meetings internally with the coaches, we're going to look at Daniel Jones and say, you absolutely cannot do that. Like, it doesn't matter. But like, to the media and everyone else, why give them any fodder or anything to be critical of Jones even more? Because then just think about the next press conference.
Yeah.
If he were to fumble it again, then they're like, you said it was the most important thing. He just did it again. Are you now looking to bench him? Like, they'll just continue to take it one step further.
So what I think is funny about it too is, and for the most, I really don't care for the most part, because the expectations of getting a lot of information at a press conferences really aren't, you're not going to glean a lot, and I don't expect to. So in that way, it's almost like, yeah, do whatever you want. To your point, I think there's a spectrum of what's the better or worse way to go about it. I think what's mostly just funny is that Joe Judge is like Bill Belichick in that way, that you're going to ask your questions and you're going to get the response you get. It's not necessarily going to be an answer to the question you asked. It'll be more
It'll be an answer.
Yeah,
an answer.
It's an answer. We just don't know if it's really pertinent to what you wanted to know. And the funny thing is that Joe Judge has more energy and more life and more personality to him. So when he gives it in that way, it's like you almost want Judge to dial it back in the press conference and just be like, yeah, we all got to get better. We all got to do better. All phases of the game. That's what we need to do. We need to improve. So that's what we'll work on. Just almost like you think you might just fall over and croak right on the microphone.
Well, when you talk about Joe Judge's press conference, he also came out and the media was asking him, like, are you going to take more shots downfield? Because that's pretty much what all Giants Twitter we've all said is like, how do you only have basically 2 plays where the ball travels more than 20 yards in the air? Like, when Daniel Jones is such a great deep passer. Great question to ask him. And he basically just said, no, the Washington football team is not the type of team that you take deep shots on. You got to go like play by play, dink, 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 and methodically get down the field. That's the only way. They're just too talented to be able to take a deep shot down the field. And I want to get your thoughts, but my initial thought was like, wait, you're saying it's much easier against that defensive front to try to continue to get 4 yards every play than it is to like get lucky once and score a touchdown. Like,
so this is the playing possum, right? You're like, oh, no. You don't want to take big shots against a team like WTF, those guys, or WFT, I guess. Well, either way, WTF. Depending on how things go tomorrow night, it could be WTF. Yeah, like it's like, no, you don't want to do that. Even though we know coming into this, as we get into the matchup, that Washington, if their weakness is on the defensive side, it's going to be in the secondary. It's going to be at the receiver matchups where you feel like you're going to want to take your deep shots. You're going to want to try to win those one-on-one battles. So that's what I mean. It's a delicate dance of press conferences and how much information you give out. So we'll leave that there, given that there is this matchup coming up. Heading into it, just as a heads up for everybody, Everett Ingram will not be playing. The speculation was just quickly that Ingram, they were maybe going to move him to the IR, the 3-week IR, then he could come back. But because they feel like he could be ready for week 3, it didn't make sense to put him there. So he's officially out, though. I've been shuffling him in my fantasy roster onto the IR and trying to make some moves as I wheel and deal early in the year. The biggest thing, I think, as we turn our attention to this game tomorrow night, is going to be what I'm labeling the QB battle. We can say whatever we want about last week, that the defense didn't look so good, and Teddy Bridgewater is that classic game manager, and he ends up having a fantastic overall day for the Broncos in that win. Is it fair for me to say Daniel Jones needs to double underline asterisk exclamation point outperform Heineke in this one, given not even that he's a backup, not even because I could say that it's basically a like for like, in my opinion, when you replace Fitzpatrick with him. Like, I think the upside is there, and so is some of the mistakes, but they're on the field at the same time. They're not playing against one another. And also, you're the 6th overall pick in the NFL draft. You need to beat Heineke. Like, you need to be better than him.
It would be nice to just be able to put up their stat lines next to each other and be like, who played better? I mean, like when you think about Teddy Bridgewater, so Pro Football Focus, I think it was, and put out the thing that said the number one leader in QBR from this past weekend was Teddy Bridgewater. And, some people have scoffed at that, but I was there. And every third down play, every critical play, when they needed 6 yards, he got 7. When he needed to convert on fourth down, he made it. When he needed to make the throw under pressure, he made it. Like, he looked great. And so we'll put Teddy Bridgewater off to the side. What I find fascinating about all this, and we're going to get into betting a little bit later, but betting lines do help you paint a little bit of a picture here. So when you look at total passing yards, the over-under projection, Taylor Heineke's over-under total passing yards is higher than Daniel Jones's going into this game.
Oh, yeah.
Taylor Heineke's chances to score 1.5 or more touchdown passes is better than Daniel Jones's. So Vegas is telling you that they're a little bit more bullish on Taylor Heineke being able to move the ball through the air and score touchdowns than they are Daniel Jones. And so, the tough part about comparing the two is one's going up against the Giants defense, which seemed to not be able to get off the field at all. The other was a top 3 defense last year that still was able to wreak havoc, sack Justin Herbert multiple times, force fumbles, all over the field, and lost, but only gave up 20 points. So,
sure.
So there's it's tough for me to say that Daniel Jones has to outplay him, but at the same time, Adam, we're talking about a backup quarterback that's a 28-year-old journeyman that was from Old Dominion, and we're even having this discussion of whether or not our first round top 6 draft pick can outplay this guy.
Career, only 92 attempts for Heineke, but he does have a 64% completion percentage. That's 2 points higher than Daniel Jones, and a rating of 79.5 to Daniel Jones 84. Point being is that, like, these guys aren't as far apart,
right?
Very small sample size for Heineke, as you might want him to be. And yet, right, like, apples to apples, whatever you want to call it, like, you do need Daniel Jones to have a big game here. When you think about it from the Giants' perspective and Daniel Jones, it's funny, as I have those numbers up in front of me here. For his career, Daniel Jones is now 36 up, 22 down in terms of touchdowns and interceptions. But remember, had a 24-12 season. Where do you stand on the offensive side of the ball? I mean, I'm going to throw it up here as biggest challenge, but just the thought that came to mind here is we're talking about Jason Garrett. We're talking about the offense. We're talking about that fluidity, right? The flash that you got from Kenny Golladay showing what a number one is about. It's in garbage time. It doesn't matter. But just the fact that Daniel Jones threw what could have been an interception and a number one wide receiver basically jumps in front of the defender, claims that ball, brings it to the ground. A couple passes later, boom, fingertip catch comes to the ground. Like, we got a little bit of a glimpse of this. Do you think, because Kenny Golladay said it coming into the season, as did a lot of offensive players, that this was going to be a building process, that Kenny Golladay said almost verbatim, we're going to come out slow. Like that, like he was like, this is not going to be a firefight. And yet you lose week 1. This game has all this pressure on it. Is the biggest challenge this offense finding its rhythm while still learning one another, given the fact that Kenny Golladay didn't play in the preseason and training camp, that Saquon Barkley still working his way back? Because that does top my list here in terms of things that I'm watching is where is this rhythm? Where is this sense of understanding amongst all those weapons?
Yeah, well, so we'll get into the matchup specific challenges, a little bit later on in the show. But to me, yes, I think my path on this goes hand in hand with what you were talking about. It must be nice to be Kenny Golladay, who signs for $20 million and is like, guys, don't expect a lot from me early on. Like,
it's only north of $4.44 million this year. So technically, he's barely even a number 3. He's barely even a number 3 by the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, isn't it nice to be able to say, guys, don't expect much from us too early? Like,
I like that.
We are not going to play well. And like, there's only
there's some chance I don't do anything, honestly. If I'm totally upfront with you, there's a big chance that you are not impressed with me until like midway through the year.
Yeah, like week 7 or 8. Ooh, I'm going to throw up some goose eggs before that. But like, it must be nice to say that. But the alternative is he's like, I'm going to come out firing. The second I'm active, I'm good to go. I'm going to get 1 million touchdowns. And then he doesn't do it. Then they question him. So yeah. I understand that. My problem is is around a little bit of continuity in terms of we don't know who's going to be on the field for the majority of the snaps, right? Like that to me is the hardest part. And it's a combination of things. It's a combination of what type of game plan are we going to call? How many wide receivers are we going to have on the field at the same time? Like how many 4 wide receiver sets did we see against the Denver Broncos? Like I couldn't even tell you. I don't even remember seeing very many, if at all, until mop-up time. Then it's like, do we know if, who's going to be across the offensive line? There's talk that, Nick Gates, our captain, might be sliding anywhere across the offensive line to help us out because we have multiple guys that can play the center position and back it up. We don't even know who's going to be there. Like on top of that, we don't know if Evan Ingram's going to be active or not when we go into these game days. As you said, they hoped for week 3. It's, now 2 weeks have gone by. Kadarius Toney was out there for a handful of snaps. Saquon Barkley was there for a cup of coffee. And
by the way, even Saquon came out and said, like, he was like, they're like, how you feeling? Whatever. He's like, yeah, not ideal on this short week. Like, and he said, like, how I feel when I'm out there. Like, I don't know, man. Like, it's weird. You know what I mean? It's a very weird vibe for a team that under Joe Judge has been very much about like, we're steady as it goes. We're going to work. We're going to be hard nosed, all these things. And then when they get asked these questions, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It's like, maybe not though. And you talk about the top of the show there about like what the record has been, and they're one of the more losing franchises. Like we keep saying, like one of the best franchises in the history of the NFL. Like, well, technically speaking, but does a decade of like kind of incompetence just start to erode that? And then, like, at what point? I was thinking about this with like MLB, right? You talk about the Yankees, and everyone will give them like a pass because they always make the playoffs and they have all this talent and blah blah blah. So sometimes, like when players don't give you the right response, you're like, but they're the Yankees. When the Mets do something like that or say something like that, everyone's like, whoa, guys, 86. You know what I mean? Like we're a little bit far away from some of the success stories that we want to talk about. Like, I do worry about these players, and I don't want to put, I have to put Saquon into that group, but like Kenny Golladay, a new guy. Adoree Jackson didn't have a great day his first game out. And again, I want to give him a little bit of a pass. Wasn't there in training camp. He's in this Patrick Graham system. Not sure if the communication is 100% yet. Like, all of these things, I've been telling everybody, like, listen, it's week 1. I understand that we feel like we've had a sample size on this team, but I want to get at least 2 weeks to develop concrete ideas. And then I want another couple of weeks to confirm it. And I know that that's not like the exciting thing to say, but I do feel like you want to give some of that wiggle room to a lot of these players, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help when you get responses like this to questions after you come off a loss in a game where, outside of the window dressing rushing touchdown from Daniel Jones, like, you lost this game 27-7. You lost 27. You put up 7 points in a league where it is about scoring, in a league where what did the Jaguars put up in that disgusting loss? So they were terrible in, right, to the Houston Texans. How many points did they put up though?
They put up like 20 something, 27. Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like you're talking about like relative to other teams. Like we're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was like, whoa, is it over before it began for Urban Meyer because he got absolutely outclassed in every single phase of the game, and they're a young team and all this stuff. Like the Giants aren't supposed to be a young team. We're supposed to be coming in and winning these games. I mean, I'm getting a little bit outside the box here, but like, we're talked about like a young, plucky upstart franchise and not like one of the class organizations. And coming into a game, you're on the road, you're calling it even money, but with a backup quarterback in there, they're saying like, yeah, but maybe Washington can just beat you with their defense alone because obviously your offense is inept.
Here's a stat, and this is another one that we've pulled off of social media. Many people have put this one out there, so we'll try to give credit where credit's due. Jason Garrett has been the offensive coordinator of the Giants for 17 games. The Giants have failed to score 20 points in 10 of them. In 10 of them.
Right. And would you say, well, like, okay, so would you say that the offensive line, for as bad as it has been, well, you can point around the league to a lot of bad offensive lines. Like you can put around the league a lot of average offensive lines. Justin Herbert had an average to subpar offensive line last year and still looks pretty good. Pat Shurmur, by the way, is the one who's responsible for the 24-12 season for Daniel Jones, not Jason Garrett, just to be clear. So, I mean, but we continue on.
No, and so I think you're bringing up the thread that Giant fans and the Giants organization maybe have this disconnect. the Giants are a blue blood organization. They're one of the premier teams. The NFL is better when people like the Giants, the Packers, the Steelers, the Bears, etc. are good. Like, that's just good business, and everybody's happy with that. What I think is being lost is, yes, the Giants won 2 Super Bowls. They didn't win those Super Bowls by being division champions. They won them by sneaking into the playoffs and going on a miraculous run with a pass rush. And you know what? The Giants organization is getting a little bit defensive. Not to harp on someone that was just part of our training camp and our preseason squad, but Alex Bachman came out and was on Twitter, and he basically came out and said, man, you got to love all these people on social media coming out and thinking they know what's best for the Giants when they haven't spent a day in the room with it. And like, people are like, did you watch the game? Have you watched the last 2 years? And he's like, I didn't specifically say the Giants. It's like, Alex, you were in the room. You were with the team. You've been on the practice squad for a year and a half. We know who you're talking about. And it's their prerogative to get defensive and be like, it's us against the world. But the evidence is there. The problems that we had last year still exist this year. It's the same offensive coordinator. It's the same quarterback. It's the same issues that we had. Conservative play calling, turnovers by Daniel Jones when he's running the ball. Like, these are things that cannot continue to happen, that keep happening. And that's the reason why Giant fans are upset. I'll tell you this, and I want your feedback on this piece. If the Giants came out and decided, you know what, Saquon's not healthy, we're going to give him a heavy dose of the vertical deep threat with Daniel Jones, and we're going to live with the mistakes. Daniel Jones is going to get sacked a bunch by Chase Young, but we're going to toss it up to Kenny Golladay a few times. We're going to try to give some go routes to Darius Slayton. We're going to throw some crazy flea flicker reverses to Kadarius Toney. Like, we're just going to go for it. If the Giants got blown out in that game, it's my feeling that everyone that is part of this Giants family would be like, at least we tried something different. Like, because what we're doing is not working.
Right. The problem is that it's like, yes, so live and die by it. Like, the problem is that the Giants organization would rather, and I want to make sure we get into this matchup here, but the Giants organization would rather do death by 1,000 paper cuts over 3 or 4 seasons with a quarterback, as opposed to, hey, grip it and rip it, young blood. And if you can't do it, you can't do it. Like, it's a great example. For a lot of fans, we're still tapping on that drum a little bit for Josh Rosen to get brought in, right? You talked about him the year prior, and listen, whatever it was, but guess what happened to him? He was drafted by a team, and I know a new head coach came in. Guess what? So did the Giants. Giants brought a new head coach in. They could have turn around and be like, nope, I'm done with him. Like, you could have chose to jettison the quarterback. And I'm not saying the Giants should or shouldn't do that with Daniel Jones, but you can move on. Like, every time that you say, let's wait a little bit longer, let's just see what happens next. Let's see what happens next. All you're doing is prolonging the process of resetting if you need to, or at least getting the right sample size to know if you need to reset. So instead of actually getting concrete information, the Giants are saying, and Jason Garrett is saying, like, well, I don't want to risk it here, right? And it's almost like you want to protect Daniel Jones from himself. Jason Garrett wants to protect himself from himself. Like, everybody wants to avoid being the problem that could end up getting your knees cut out from underneath you. And all we end up with is now, after week 1, now we're here in week 2. And I've been as big a proponent of this as anybody about saying, let's just be patient. Let's not overreact to this. And yet, every year now, year number 3 for Daniel Jones, now you can look around the league. It's like, Kyler Murray drafted in the same draft class, like Justin Herbert, a younger quarterback, right? Like, all of a sudden you're seeing other quarterbacks that, in spite of great teams, bad teams, good offensive lines, bad offensive lines, finding ways to have success. And whether it's the players or coaching and scheme, something's not connecting here for the Giants.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say on the overarching theme before we get into the Washington football team is, let's talk about Jason Garrett's time with the Dallas Cowboys. Like, we forget that he didn't always call plays for the Dallas Cowboys. I think that's important. But also, he was fine with what was happening and watched it because they had one of the best offensive lines in the league. And Ezekiel Elliott was just coming into the league and could run the ball and fall forward for 4 or 5 yards. That's not the offensive line the Giants have. That's not the type of running back they have. And they also had an amazing situation with Tony Romo, who is a veteran quarterback that could get back there and bail you out of 3rd and long situations. And then they fall into Dak Prescott, who ends up being a great quarterback that they draft in the mid-round. So, like, their whole situation is drastically different to ours. I don't want this to be about Dallas. talk to me a little bit about the Washington football team and the matchup on Thursday.
Well, so now you talk about biggest challenges on this day, and you mentioned it right now. All of a sudden, Nick Gates, who moved positions, and this is what we talked about. And you can go back, man. You can go back and look at them. I'll save my breath on it. Check out the YouTube channel. We're going to go ahead and do this deep dive of the what if the New York Football Giants actually just keep Nick Gates at right tackle, when they could have done that and had him been the starting right tackle. Because now that's what you're talking about. You bring these other players. You have Bredesen. He played some reps there at left guard. You have Price. Maybe, the idea might be that he's going to move into centers that affords you the opportunity to move Gates over. So what you're looking at inside of this game is, how do we protect Daniel Jones? Because Solder and Peart both look bad. If I'm between the two of them, I'm playing Peart because he at least has some chance of having upside. I think Solder is much closer to his retirement package than he is, getting back into form. It's not even a knock on him. That's going to be the big challenge. You saw it last week, Denver. They didn't have Chubb, so, you were able to maybe mitigate some of the risk there. Daniel Jones was clean on 74% of his dropbacks on Sunday, and you still didn't have a ton of success. I was a little bit surprised by the lack of success in the running game. He didn't face Saquon Barkley, a lot of 8-man fronts. I think they only did it once or twice, if at all, in that game. So the Denver Broncos just said, hey, can you beat our front with your line? The Giants weren't able to. So my biggest challenge is going to be, can the Giants now play balanced offensive line football? Going back to last year, we saw them have success in the running game, couldn't do it in the passing game. Now, week one, you at least pass protected better, but the offensive line struggled in the running game, only 2.6 yards per carry for Saquon Barkley. That's the first and foremost, because that's what it's predicated on, is giving Daniel Jones time, giving this running game time to get off the ground. And you're going to face two studs there between obviously Chase Young. You're also going to have Montez Sweat in the mix there. It's a formidable front, and that's where it has to be where your mind goes first when we talk about Thursday night.
You mentioned Montez Sweat, and that's what I wanted to highlight, Adam, is that, on one side you have the battle between Chase Young and Andrew Thomas, which, we know Chase Young is all world, and you just kind of cross your fingers, as you say, and just say, look, it's a top 5 pick against a top 5 pick. Chase Young's going to get around him at least once and create some problems. You just hope that the majority of the time Andrew Thomas can stay upright and keep him in front of him. You got to move that piece to the side and hope for the best there. Our biggest challenge is keeping Montez Sweat off of Daniel Jones. And the problem, as you said, is it Matt Peart? Is it Nate Solder? Is it Nick Gates? And all of a sudden we got to move around our center position. Montez Sweat had 9 sacks last year on opposite side of Chase Young. He already has a sack and a forced fumble, tackle for loss. He's all over the place, in the Chargers game. He's only getting better. And so for me, I look at that side, the right-hand side, as one of the big challenges. You really think the Giants have to get creative with not only snap counts, but exotic ways and naked bootlegs and different things to try to throw them off of, like, just pinning back and teeing up against Daniel Jones. What I didn't expect to say after week one was, what are we going to do if the cornerback position, the thing that we thought was our bread and butter, turns out to not be as good as we were hoping? James Bradberry gave up 6 catches on 7 targets. Adoree Jackson got lost on that one ball that should have been a touchdown. Like, our cornerbacks were not great. That was not the best effort from that group. And if we're not getting the pass rush that we need already, and our cornerbacks aren't able to shut down someone like Terry McLaurin, who is a very good wide receiver. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about them getting pressure on us and that being a problem. We're talking about our cornerback play not being as good as it could be. These are not recipes for success. These are legitimate challenges for us.
Yeah, Antonio Gibson's is an all-around back. He can do both things for you there out of the backfield. You add in McKissick as well, and I'm talking about them in regards to the passing, purely a passing game. Terry McLaurin, the rookie Diami Brown that I was high on coming out of the draft. Adam Humphries, at least a veteran guy that knows how to run a solid route. You throw in Logan Thomas there at the tight end position as well, which we know, again, we mentioned this, a footnote out of the snap counts. You didn't get any of my boy Carter Coughlin in last week's game, really, even in spite of the number change over to 52. You didn't see a lot of him. So now you're talking about Blake Martinez, Reggie Ragland, and Tay Crowder. Maybe Tay Crowder can be effective in the pass coverage game, but every single time that you see Blake Martinez and Reggie Ragland out there, audible. You're going to want to try to work that passing game. You're trying to work over the middle and see if the Giants can adjust. So yeah, that's obviously one of the big challenges for me is how does the secondary respond to it? And again, how does Dory Jackson and James Bradberry look another week? And what does that communication really look like? And I don't know what to chalk it up to. And I think this is that fine line when you bring in Bradberry and then you go sign a Dory Jackson. It does feel like, hey, are we sure that these guys are top 10 cornerbacks, top 12 cornerbacks in the league? Because if they're anything less than that, all the other weaknesses start to open up. You talk about the defensive front defending against the run. We said it in the review of last week's game. They'd already given up almost 100 yards on the ground before that big run that opened it up and gashed them for that huge touchdown, right? So that has to be on the minds of the defensive side of the ball there. I give Patrick Graham the benefit of the doubt, some new players there, et cetera, and then say he'll figure that out because we believed in him so much last year. The offensive piece of it with Jason Garrett is kind of like, well, we didn't believe in him last year, and I feel like we still don't.
Yeah, I was going to say, Adam, it's easy to write things off, as you said. Look at the Green Bay Packers. They put up 3 points. They looked abysmal. Aaron Rodgers looked terrible.
Yeah.
Aaron Rodgers was the MVP of the league, and he was all-world last year. Do you put more stock in one game, or do you put it more in the totality of a season? So for me, I'm not going to overreact yet, but it is something to look at. If James Bradberry gets burned a couple times by Terry McLaurin, then you got to sit here and say, our one strength that we thought was our secondary, and it's not working the way it is.
Yeah, it'll be a big problem for them, certainly. Let's go positive here. Where can the Giants win? We talked about the issues and places they're going to struggle, but offensively, let's start there. Where can the Giants win in this matchup? I think there's a pretty obvious area you look to, but where does your mind go when you think about how Daniel Jones, Jason Garrett, and this offense can have some success?
Yeah, so for me, it's attacking the secondary of the Washington football team. I don't think we're reinventing the wheel here by saying that. I mean, you got a guy like Kendall Fuller, you got a guy like Willie Jackson III on the outside for the Washington football team. They're middle of the road cornerbacks. They're not blazing a trail. They're not lighting the FedEx Field on fire. There's nothing that really concerns me about them. Kendall Fuller 5'11", 5'10". I think Willie Jackson's like 6 foot. Decent size, nothing crazy. But then you have big targets like Kenny Golladay on the outside. That's going to always be a matchup nightmare for people like that. And he's going to have 3, 4, 5, 6 inches on most cornerbacks that he goes up against. And that's really why I think Giant fans are basically saying, you've spent $19 million a year on this go-to wide receiver. He's a big body. All the advanced analytics and metrics say jump balls, red zone threat, deep ball kind of guy, catch radius, like unbelievable. And then we just don't throw him any of those balls. Like, this is the type of game where if you're going to be getting a crazy pass rush from Chase Young on one side and Montez Sweat on the other, you're going to have to release the ball a little bit earlier than maybe the route is done. That's the benefit of having a guy like Kenny Golladay that can go up in the air vertically and get that ball before maybe the play is matured enough.
Kenny Golladay among the worst separation rate from week 1 in the NFL, which is the thing the Giants struggled with last year. And again, that's not what he's predicated or built on, but when Darius Slayton isn't known for that, obviously Shepard had a nice game for himself. It's this balancing act. And you think about the pressure getting brought from the Washington football team. If they can do it without bringing extra bodies, now those things where you want to get them out of your hands quickly, the safeties are able to jump some of those routes a little bit. So, I agree with you. The Giants need to expose that passing attack. Sterling Shepard needs to have another big game because I think it starts there with him out of the slot, and then it starts to open up a little bit more, right? You bite down a safety to try to guard against some of those things. I wouldn't hate if you're going to give Saquon Barkley a couple more reps, start working him out of the backfield. Give me that little out and cut in route from the running back. Get him over the middle as well, just to force the Washington defense to have to do something different, bring down some of that coverage, and then you have to look to be explosive. It'll be interesting to see if Garrett chooses to do that. For me, listen, where can the Giants win? They can win in the secondary. I have to hope and believe that the secondary is as good as we thought it was going to be coming into the season. You have Heineke under center. I think that we've seen he's willing to take chances. He's willing to go that extra mile because he has been a journeyman backup quarterback and every chance counts for him. Take advantage of it. We saw Logan Ryan do it last week. Now it's going to be about take advantage of it and have the offense reward you with a touchdown, but you got to turn them over. Got to have a spy probably down in the box. I think against a guy like Antonio Gibson, make sure that you shut him down first and foremost. the Giants should have success from a ball hawking standpoint. I think you're going to see some of these numbers for McLaurin, maybe for Logan Thomas out of the tight end spot, but be opportunistic. I think when a mistake gets made, and it will, you have to capitalize on it. You can't afford to have an interception go off your hands. You can't afford to have a tackle for a loss get scampered for an incomplete or maybe a touchdown, like we saw with Teddy Bridgewater. Xavier McKinney, you're in his face, get the job done. Azeez Ojulari, get the job done, right? You were there to make some plays last week, and it's not to put icing on a turd sandwich, but there were opportunities there. You have to just finish and execute, and I have to believe, especially this defense is going to come out with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, because they know for whatever the offense didn't do last week, the defense did not show up in any way, shape, or form. They have to provide a spark to start this game.
Yeah, well, we know that the defense didn't meet their expectations. The offense certainly didn't. We talked about how the secondary is beatable for Washington. When you look at their linebacking room, you'd actually be surprised.
Former New York Football Giant, John Bostic.
Yeah, so John, you have John Bostic starting. You have Jamin Davis, who just got drafted a minute ago. Backing them up, you have former New York Giant David Mayo. Like, this is not a world beater of a linebacking core. Yep. And so, like, if you can get past that initial pass rush, which I'm not saying it's very easy to do, but like once you get to that second level, that next level, we're talking about cornerbacks that don't scare you. We're talking about linebackers that I wouldn't say are amazingly athletic or anything to be worried about. I like the Giants linebackers much better than I like the Washington linebackers. Mm-hmm. There are places for the Giants to have success in this game. They just need to be able to exploit them and give Daniel Jones at least a little bit of time to be able to exploit them.
Yeah, and run that ball effectively against them. Get to the second level and expose that weakness at the linebacker spot. Prediction time, my friend. We said it at the top. 40.5 is the over-under. The Giants are getting 3 right now. We were both wrong last week, though we both got the under, so we put that in our back pocket, right? But even if we took the points, we weren't gonna quite get home last week. Where do you go in this game? What do you think? What's the outcome? How do the Giants fare on a short turnaround Thursday night in Washington?
We talk about the Giants, 17 games under Garrett, 10 of them, they just haven't scored 20 points, and they haven't been able to manufacture points. You're talking about Saquon on a short week, maybe not entirely healthy. Evan Ingram's already been ruled out. I'm struggling because, I've gone through the normal.
And he's going to pick the Giants, guys, just to let you know. He's doing this tap dance here. He's still going to go. He's still going to go for the Giants.
I have gone back and forth in my mind. You start out Monday and the world is falling apart, just like everybody else. Then by Tuesday, you're like, this stinks. Like, I can't believe we're 0-1. And then you get to Wednesday and you're like, but there's always week 2, right? Like, and you start to turn around and say, all right, we could turn this around. Where I stand on this is I don't think the Giants are going to be able to manufacture enough points against this pass rush. This offensive line is still a work in progress. And although it was better last week, Andrew Thomas looked great last week. Yeah. I'm just concerned about how much pressure the Washington football team can get. I'm not really as concerned about Taylor Heinicke. I think he has the ability to make a play or two. I'm still concerned about what's going on. My prediction is Washington football team 17, Giants 10. So progressing on the 7 points they got before mop up time of last week. But
right, yeah, really clean.
Adam, where's your head? Where's your heart leaning?
Well, my head is leaning where pessimistic Mike has been for the last decade as a Giants fan. He's it's the older you are is the more history you have with the team, and the history tells you that the Giants aren't good and that Daniel Jones might not be the quarterback. Probably, maybe some could argue probably isn't the quarterback. Maybe we should have known this already. But I'm not leaning on any of the quote history of Daniel Jones having never lost to the Washington football team. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me in a new season. However, I do think that this defense is going to step up and make some plays. I do think that there are a couple of lessons to be learned from last week. If the offensive line plays the same way that it played last week, it gives you an opportunity to have some success. I don't know what Jason Garrett's future is, but I know that we'll see a little bit more Kadarius Toney. We'll see a little bit more Saquon Barkley, and we'll see a little bit more opportunities for some dynamic plays. So I'm going to go down with the ship. You know my style. I love to do it. And I'm going to take the New York Football Giants. Oh, guys, like it's like how do you call for
what's the score?
I know. How do you call? How do you ask for, like, it has to be like 9-7, right? Like, how can you predict anything more than 10 points for the New York Giants? I know. I'm going to go with the New York Football Giants, and I am going to go with an absurdly healthy number, like 21-17. New York Football Giants. I think that the defense will do what's necessary to give some short fields. And if Eli Manning, God, if Eli Manning comes out of retirement and gives some playoff magic, if Daniel Jones again has a clean game right up to the point where he fumbles it and then chooses not to fumble it, I think you'll see some success there. I think maybe we'll even see Jason Garrett lean a little bit more into some of, as you mentioned earlier, naked bootlegs, get Daniel Jones out in space, and maybe he runs for a couple of yards earlier in the game to make that defense have to respect what he can do with his legs and open up other opportunities. So we are on opposite sides of the line, though dangerously close to me saying, don't go just, you may want to take the points just to be on the safe side of it. I've got the Giants pulling out the win, saving the season before it goes into the depths of despair. Meanwhile, Andy Makowitz says it's all over as of tomorrow night for the New York Football Giants. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, do all of it. OGP, One Giant Podcast with myself, Adam Armbrecht, and over there, Andy Makowitz, who wants, needs, and demands that the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.